Hi, everyone, and welcome. So I'm delighted to say that as part of API Days Helsinki, you are the first audience to officially learn about the new launch of the Arazzo specification. So we've talked about this in the past under the working title of the workflow specification, but now we have a formal name, Arazzo, which is the Italian for tapestry. And it's all about giving us the deterministic ability to describe API workflows across the modern API stack. So I'm going to dive into the what and why of the specification today and let you ponder if it's the missing piece of the API puzzle, and hopefully get you excited about what will happen as tooling starts to spring up supporting the specification. So a little bit of a warning up front, you're going to see some YAML today and arguably some bad memes along the way as well. So a little bit about me. My name is Frank Kilcommins. I'm Principal API Technical Evangelist at SmartBear. I'm a software engineer and architect by trade, and I have a great passion for APIs. I do quite a bit of work with the Open API initiative, and I'm one of the main contributors on the Arazzo specification. Now, why did I decide to get so heavily involved in it? Well, I work with quite a lot of customers as part of my role at SmartBear, and I'm always surprised as to how much folks are still struggling when dealing with API documentation and how to present APIs in a way that are really improving the consumer developer experience. And the first thing I would say, if you're using APIs or you're building APIs without having any proper API documentation, then your house really is on fire. You know, it greatly hinders your ability to catalog your API portfolio. If you can't record the APIs that you have, it makes them harder to discover. That will ultimately hinder the adoption and ultimately impacts the success of your API. Now, you might say, Frank, we fully understand this and we document all of our APIs with well-known specifications like the Open API specification or Async API, and that's really good. But this gives you more or less the raw ingredients as to what an API can do, but it doesn't help you bake a cake or make a product available in order to help consumers achieve their jobs to be done. Now, when provider teams even do understand how important it is to be able to articulate the overall value on offer from an API, we still see that they're struggling. So in some of our research that we do from a SmartBear perspective, we're still seeing what we call an alignment gap. So only 48% of teams are confident that their APIs are documented well enough to explain the value on offer towards consumers. And approximately 43% are unsure that their processes or the processes that they have in place will allow them to deliver appropriate developer experience. And that's the same developer experience that they hold third-party providers account to when they are consuming their APIs. Now, of course, having APIs is critically important. It's the fundamental ingredient for us to make our digital capabilities available for consumption in other experiences, should I say. But so far from the standards and specifications community, we haven't really come up for a way to allow us to be able to describe how to perform multiple API calls in a sequence. Because when it comes to consuming APIs, in 99% of the time, we need to make more than a single API call in order to allow us to achieve our jobs to be done. So luckily, here comes the Arazzo specification to help. And what is the Arazzo specification all about? Well, it describes an approach to document use case orientated workflows in a programmatical readable format. So the formats that we're talking about here are YAML and JSON. And when I talk about a workflow, it's a series of API calls which, when woven together, really help us to be able to accomplish some business objective or outcome. And of course, the additional human readable nature here makes it easy for humans to understand the process, but the machine readable attributes really allow us and afford us the ability to have a streamlined process when we combine it with tools that will support the specification. Now, from a working group perspective, we focused on a number of use cases leading us to creating the Arazzo specification. And here are some of the highlights from the use cases that we focused on. The first is really to give us the ability to provide deterministic recipes for the use of APIs. So I think we've all been in a situation where we are onboarding a developer or a partner team to consume our APIs, and we hand over the reference document like an Open API document. But if that's very, very large, if it has tens or hundreds of endpoints in there, it can be quite confusing for that consuming developer. If we're more modular in our approaches, then it's also quite likely that the business flow that's needed by the consumer to extract the value and integrate it into their system spans across multiple API descriptions. Again, we have no way to solve that particular problem. And as a result, we end up creating lots of additional documentation to form our overall API documentation that we make available for consumers when they're trying to onboard. And as soon as we create these other forms of documentation, be it static HTML that's in a developer portal, be it PDF documents, Word documents, PowerPoint documents, etc. As soon as we craft them, they have the likelihood of becoming stale very, very quickly. So the Arazzo specification also targets this. So it really focuses on having the ability to be able to generate living documentation that always articulates the value that's on offer on top of the underlying APIs. And that we feel will really aid and improve the consuming developer experience, as well as some of the processes on the provider side. And fundamentally, as part of that, it gives us this assertable ability to validate that the promises that we're making towards our consumers are still attainable as underlying APIs change. We also want to really improve the tooling ecosystem around code generation and SDK generation. So again, if we think of the first use case where we have really large API documents, if we generate code from those, then we will similarly get very large and unwieldy code or boilerplate code that's generated. Instead, if we could generate code for a specific use case, very, very targeted, then we will ensure that for consuming developers, they will stay on piste and on course to achieve and integrate that business value as quickly as possible. So really reducing their mean time to integration. There's lots of industry and standards groups like the open banking, like OIDC, who are looking also at the Arazzo specification. So in the open banking example, we will be able to kind of benchmark banks to ensure that they're providing the APIs and the capabilities that they're regulatory obliged to provide towards other competition in the market. From a OIDC perspective, trying to describe FAPI grade APIs and OAuth, OpenID connect flows and push authorization requests, etc., is very, very difficult using just OpenAPI. But if we're able to describe this workflow and the sequence of calls which together formulate one of those flows or modes, then it becomes very, very useful, and it improves the understanding for consumers and providers. The elephant in the room, of course, is the AI models that are out there. And the Arazzo specification gives us an ability to have very deterministic execution of our APIs. So if we want to hand over control to AI to perform critical sequences of calls on our behalf, we need to ensure that that will be first time right and every time right. And the Arazzo specification gives us this machine readable semantics that will enable AI models to be able to do that on our behalf. Okay, so what does the specification look like? So this is a very high-level picture of the specification. Hopefully you're familiar with something like this if you're comfortable with OpenAPI or Async API. And I'm going to walk you through very briefly through the structure so that you will become a little bit more comfortable and realize that it's not complex, that it hopefully is quite intuitive to understand. So the first thing we have is an info object. So this is just metadata about the defined Arazzo document itself and looking at what that might look like. The info object will have a title, it'll have a summary and a description. It'll have a specific version of the document itself. And just for illustrative purposes here, I'm also showing that this particular document that we're crafting is conforming to the Arazzo specification 1.0.0. We then have source descriptions. So this is a list of source descriptions like APIs, an open API description, for example, that can be referenced by one or more workflows within the Arazzo document. So it's really setting the boundary on which we can apply a workflow to. So if we want the workflow to apply over one or multiple APIs, we need to ensure that their descriptions are part of the source descriptions. So you can think of them like namespaces or like imports from a coding perspective. And looking at this example, I have two source descriptions. I have a pets API and an adoptions API. Both are of type open API, and I'm providing the URL to where those open API descriptions can be found and processed. We then have workflows. So these describes the workflows to be taken across one or more APIs to achieve a particular objective. And if we look at the structure of the workflows object, each workflow has an ID, it has a summary, it has a description. It then has inputs, parameters, success actions, failure actions, steps, whether or not it depends on another workflow, and then outputs that will be returned to the calling context. And I'll step through all of these over the next couple of slides. So the first thing we have within a workflow is the inputs, and we describe inputs using JSON schema, and think of this like input parameters that we would provide into a function. So in this particular example, I have a simple inputs object expecting properties, category, breed, location, and API key, and then I'm defining which ones are also required. So a very simple JSON schema object in this example. We then have the real meat of the specification itself, and this is the steps object, and each step represents a call to an underlying API operation, or indeed out to another workflow that might be defined in the same document or in a external document that's referenced through the source descriptions. So looking at the steps, each step has an ID, it has a description, it has a mechanism for referencing an API operation. So in this case, it's an operation ID. If the API operation did not define an operation ID, then you can use a JSON pointer to reference into that particular location within the targeted OpenAPI file. We then have parameters. We have success criteria. So these are the conditions that determine whether or not this step is successful. So in this example, if the API that we're invoking returns a 200 status code, and also if it returns a body containing pets, and there's at least one pet contained, then we determine that this step has been successful. We then have optional things that we can do on success, optional things that we can do on failure. So on failure would be triggered if any of the success criteria conditions did not hold true. And then each step has outputs that can be passed along within the context of a workflow. And I'll get into all of these as we move forward. So the parameters is a list of parameter objects, and each represents a parameter to pass to an API operation or to a workflow. So think of parameters like query parameters, path parameters, headers, etc. So we're really being very explicit and deterministic with regards to how we will map these particular parameters into the API operation that we're about to call. Then, assuming that a step fails, we have what's known as failure actions. And this is a list of failure action objects that specify what to do if a particular step fails. And there's various types of failure actions that we have. We have a retry type, which is this particular example. And in this example, I'm saying this will be triggered if the condition that's defined underneath the criteria holds true. So if I get a status 503 service unavailable from the API operation, then I should retry this particular step after 1 second, and I should exhaust the retries after a limit of 5 attempts. Now, the retry itself can also specify a step ID or a workflow ID. And if they are specified, then that reference is executed and the context is returned to the current step, after which the current step is retried. So for example, if I was to get a 401 back from an API operation and I determined that the token had expired, potentially I could reference out to a refresh token workflow. Once we get a new token back into the context of the current step, I could retry the current step, and then hopefully that would be successful and I could continue on. The other types of failure action objects that we have are an end type. So the workflow then just ends if the criteria that are specified hold true. And then we also have a go-to type, and that's a one-way transfer of workflow control to a specified label within the document. So that could either be a workflow ID or a step ID that's defined somewhere else within the document. Very similarly, then we have optional things that we can do on success of a step. And these are defined using the success actions. So in this particular example, I have a go-to type of success action. So I've determined that everything I need, I have it at this particular point in the workflow. I don't need to execute potentially the next few steps, and I can immediately go to the join waiting list step. The other type of a on success action type that we have is end. So just go to an end for success actions. We then have outputs, and outputs are just a friendly map between a name and a dynamic output, and these outputs are returned and available within the context of a workflow. So in this example, I'm returning a pet ID, and the value of the pet ID is evaluated at runtime based on the particular expression that's specified here. Similarly, then at the workflow level, we also have outputs, and then these outputs are available outside the context of the workflow. So perhaps to the software that is invoking the workflow itself. So again, the similar premise, and in this instance, I'm just returning 3 outputs and the expressions that will be evaluated to values before they are returned. The other objects that are specified within the Arazzo specification are all contained within the components and other kind of utility operations. And these are all about supporting reusability or referenceability between different parts of the document itself. So for example, if I had a parameter that was a common parameter, I could define that within the components parameters and then reference that from different steps along the way. Okay, so that's a very high-level overview of the specification itself. So let's now apply it to a real-world example. So in this particular example, I'm working for a fictitious company called Petco, and we have a problem. So we're being overwhelmed by the number of pets being abandoned at our pet store. We've done our research because we're a good product-oriented organization, and we've decided that if we create the ability to search for and adopt pets that we catalog, that it will improve the problem that we're having. We're going to make this service available via our own proprietary website, but our research has shown that we also should make it available as an API to a wider ecosystem of shelters, charities, and pet orphanages to maximize the potential of rehousing these pets. So we have 2 APIs for this particular part of the business. We have a pets API and an adoptions API. We could even imagine that these are under the control of independent development teams. But what we want to make available to our UX team, and indeed to the external developers who will be working for the broader ecosystem of pet shelters, etc., is the workflow for adopting a pet matching specific criteria. And the steps that are needed to be able to do this are as follows. We need to be able to search for a pet. We need to be able to initiate an adoption request. We need to confirm that the adoption has been completed by updating the status of that adoption. And then finally, we should verify that the pet has been fully updated and they're no longer appearing as available for adoption in our pets listing. Now, we can leverage the Arazzo specification to describe very deterministically what needs to happen in order to be able to achieve this particular workflow. So we can craft the YAML structure. And of course, the value here is not that we will be giving this YAML document conforming to the Arazzo specification to consuming developers. The real value comes when tooling can understand and parse this from a machine readability perspective and can produce artifacts, be that code or be it documentation or be it visual aids that will really improve the consuming experience. So for example, you could imagine that this YAML would be processed by some rendering tool and it will spit out an activity diagram to explain what steps need to be done by the developer in order to be able to achieve this workflow. And to bring this even more to life and kind of to whet the appetite and let you see the potential use cases that are here, I've created a little GPT that I've trained on the Arazzo specification, and we'll run through an example of leveraging the GPT to create an Arazzo document and then to create some markdown that I can immediately put into a developer portal to explain how this workflow can be integrated into a consuming application. So here I'm just testing the GPT's knowledge on the Arazzo specification. So I ask it to provide 3 main benefits for the specification, which it does quite accurately. So it tells me it's going to streamline API integration, improve developer productivity, and facilitate automation. I then give it the exact workflow that we just talked about. So give it access to the 2 APIs and the steps. And now it creates an Arazzo document illustrating how this workflow needs to be achieved. And it does about an 80% good job, I would say, at providing it. I then ask it to follow its instruction template to generate me markdown documentation that I can use to embed within my developer portal. So it generates a nice table here telling me exactly the steps I need to do. It then creates Plant UML and Mermaid syntax that I can use to craft flow diagrams and activity diagrams. I then take that information, I bring it over in this instance to the Swagger Hub developer portal. You can see I have the reference APIs here for pets and adoptions, but I've been able to automatically create really useful onboarding information. So this very nice step overview table that gives me the operation IDs, the parameters I need to pass, what determines if this API call is successful, what outputs I need. I also generated the flow diagrams, and you can see that I even, via the GPT, generated very specific client code. So this isn't boilerplate code matching the pets and adoptions API. This is code representing that adopt pet workflow. And I was really able to achieve that more or less end to end with a bit of massaging here and there, of course. So that's kind of a very quick overview of the Arazzo specification. And we're really excited about the potential. What I would ask you all to do is to get engaged with this specification as early as possible. You will see tooling popping up very, very soon that's supporting it across different ecosystems from different vendors. So please join the Slack workplace, should I say. Go over to GitHub, start the repo. Feel free to submit any of your use cases via the discussions or the issues. And if you want to learn more about the specification, here are the links that you can follow. And there's also some examples contained within the repository itself. So thanks very much. Also, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions on the Arazzo specification. I'm really here to help you learn, get engaged, and support you where possible. So that's it from me. Thank you very, very much.